The time has come for the death of this condemned man, to not only show the people of this town that we do not tolerate such heinous acts, but to act as a deterrent for those who think to pursue this lifestyle. Executioner, open the trapdoor. I think the rope was too long. You'd assume that being an executioner sounds like a pretty easy and straightforward job, wouldn't you? Well, you couldn't be any more wrong, because even when they're told to kill someone and given the tools to do it, on the big day they still manage to fuck it up. It's not often that it happens, but it happens, and they're only human after all, so you can't put the blame on them. The person being executed may still die, don't worry, it just takes a bit longer, and doesn't go as intended. And if they don't die the first time, well then they try again, or not bother to try again and just let the ex-condemned go back to prison to die in there instead. And these people are also human, but you can put the blame on them for their actions which led them into the situation they are in now, or the situation they were in. Ignoring if these people were ever innocent, because that's an entirely different moral argument and topic, and if they were innocent, they're already dead, so there's not much we could do about that. But what we can do is look into a few of the many such cases of botched executions, whilst simultaneously stroking our ego and thinking to ourselves we could do a much better job, because being an executioner does sound pretty easy and straightforward, doesn't it? Joseph Samuel begins on a strong start of a botched execution with a botched attempt at hanging, and is one of the only two people known to be known as the man they couldn't hang, the other person being John Babacombe Lee, aka the other man they couldn't hang. Joseph was a man with a life fueled by crime, and at around 15 years old he got convicted for robbery, and only 6 years later he received the mild punishment of being banished and transported to Australia, to make sure he saw the error of his ways and would never commit another crime again. While down in the land down under, Joseph continued his life of crime after escaping a penal colony, and instead of dying in the Aussie wilderness that penal colony guards had thought was happened to convicts, he instead lived on to continue his criminal endeavours in a criminal gang. His days of criminality would catch up to him properly on the evening of the 25th of August 1803. Joseph and the gang would enter the house of a one Mary Breeze and stole a portable desk in her home containing both legal documents and money. Mary reported the crime to Joseph Luca, an ex-convict turned night watch police officer, and Luca had begun investigating the robbery around Mary's premises when he started his shift. Joseph, the officer not the criminal, had his suspicions on who it could have been behind this, as this wasn't the only robbery going on at the time in the area. He believed it was his fellow constable Isaac Simmons when the robbery had been initially reported. Luca eventually found the desk that got stolen nearby in some shrubbery, and in the early hours of the 26th of August, the body of Luca would also be found along with the portable desk, now including a wheelbarrow wheel. Both objects covered in blood, Luca having sustained several wounds across him and his own cutlass embedded into his skull. This was the first death of an Australian police officer in the line of duty, and very soon Samuel and his gang would get hunted down for the robbery and murder, and were all put onto trial for these crimes. During the trial, all suspects had been accused of either robbery and murder. Two of the suspects, Isaac Simmons and William Bladders, another constable known to both Simmons and Luca, was accused of the murder, and John Russell, Richard Jackson and Joseph Samuel had been accused of breaking and entering and robbing Mary's house. Fortunately for most of these suspects, the evidence that had been presented for each wasn't enough to make the charges stick. Simmons and Bladders got acquitted from the murder charges after passing the most important speech checking their lives. Russell got let off his charge of breaking and entering for lack of evidence. Jackson admitted to the robbery, but instead testified against Samuel, who admitted to taking part in the robbery, but denied he was ever involved with the killing of Luca. Not only was this evidence enough to hold against Samuel, but Mary had also claimed to recognise him during the trial as one of the people who broke into her home, which only further weighed in on the final verdict. Samuel was found guilty of breaking and entering, but never got convicted for the murder of Luca, so there was never full closure for the dead Joseph, unfortunately, meaning the murder can be considered a cold case because of this, but at least there was closure on who it was involved in stealing poor Mary's portable desk. Joseph Samuel, you thieving bastard, you. His punishment for this? Death! What else did you think it was? Samuel's execution by hanging was meant to be on the 26th of September, 1 month after the death of Luca, and it was accompanied by another criminal who was also getting hanged. Instead of the trapdoor type of hanging, they were instead kept propped up by a cart, which would be driven away and leave the condemned hanging out until they finally died by strangulation. The other criminal that was being hung with Samuel died no problems at all. As for Samuel, it didn't go as smooth. The first attempt at hanging him didn't work because the rope had snapped, and this rope wasn't weak or cheap. This was supposed to be strong enough to hold 1,000 pounds of weight, and to visualise that as a person should have been enough to hold someone up as heavy as your mother, which should have worked, but of course it didn't. Instead, Samuel fell to the floor, sprained his ankle and fell to the floor. The second time they got Samuel to do it again, but the executioner was a little too eager to kill him this time around. He was back on the cart with the rope around his neck, the same rope as the first. The cart drove off, but the rope was too loose this time and began to unravel, and Samuel was touching the ground. After this second failure to hang a man, the crowd was beginning to get a little rousy, calling for the execution to be called off and for Samuel to be freed. Instead, the executioner didn't do that. He tied the rope round Samuel's neck a third time and made sure he pulled the rope nice and tight enough to not loosen. Samuel was back on the cart was driven away yet again, and it almost looked like the third time was the charm. But it wasn't, because once again the rope had snapped, and Joseph was on the floor once again. The third attempt was the final straw for the crowd, and they weren't happy they watched only one of the criminals die and not both of them. Samuel's hanging was delayed by an on-looking policeman who went to grab the governor for his final say, and after looking over everything that was in place and the rope used to hang Samuel, which was the exact same type of rope used to hang the other guy, the governor came to the final conclusion, along with the members of the crowd, that this was a sign from God. For they thought God believed Samuel did not commit a crime serious enough to be faced with death. Which is kinda true. I know this was Australia, Britain's new favourite penal colony hotspot, but killing someone for a robbery seems a bit extreme, don't it? Well, whatever you think of it, our modern arguments are 200 years too late to Samuel's scheduled execution, and Samuel was let go from being executed the fourth time thanks to divine intervention, and his sentence changed from death to life imprisonment, working in a mine. Now that sounds a lot more reasonable of a punishment. A few years after all this, in 1806, he would attempt to escape by boat along with several others, and this was the last time Joseph Samuel was ever heard of again. It's assumed that he drowned when trying to flee because Samuel's body had never been recovered or found. Wallace Wilkerson had found himself to be bleeding out after a failed execution by firing squad, which had been his choice of death. In 1877, Wilkerson had been playing a game of cribbage in a saloon with the bartender of another saloon he frequented, William Baxter. They were playing for money in the game too, and I'm already sure you can see where this is going. They both get into a minor argument over accusing each other of cheating during the game, which the argument has been quickly settled by Baxter backing down and Wilkerson making sure Baxter wouldn't dare accuse him again by popping 2 caps in Baxter's skull and fleeing the scene. Wilkerson was quick to be captured and held by Utah authorities for trial, and examinations on Baxter's corpse determined he was unarmed during the shooting. He got accused of premeditated murder and pled not guilty because believing your opponent to be cheating in a cards game is a very valid reason to kill anyone, and was kept held in the Utah County Jail in the Utah Territory. A few months later he was put on trial, found guilty and was sentenced to death, and was given a choice to die by hanging, firing squad or decapitation, as these were the choices of ways to die in the territory when sentenced to death. He chose to be gunned down by firing squad, and his scheduled dying time was set to be on the 14th of December 1877. It's supposed to be set on that date anyway, because appeals to Wilkerson's execution was made by his attorneys to the Supreme Court, claiming that Wilkerson's death sentence violated his 8th Amendment rights, that being protection against cruel and unusual punishments. The appeal got denied and it only delayed the inevitable by about 1.5 years, and the day would finally come. After spending his last day with his wife, he would be taken out to the jail yard to be put down, with onlookers and spectators watching a man's final moments. Billycock on head and cigar in mouth, he gave a farewell speech to those watching, thanking the police officers and saying he holds no grudges to anyone, except for one person who accused him of swearing a false oath on his trial, which Wilkerson held a grudge against. He was sat on a chair with a white paper target placed in front of his heart for the firing squad to shoot, refusing to wear a blindfold and insisted to not be restrained to the chair, promising the executioners he intended to die like a man and look at the executioners in the eye. The executioners were hidden in a shed, so Wilkerson couldn't really look him in the eyes like he wanted to, and then the time had come. The marshal had started the countdown to shoot, and when the time was up, the guns had opened fire. Oh my god, they've missed it! Well yeah, they missed it because you stiffened up right before they shot the target. And they didn't miss, they merely failed to shoot your heart. Instead they shot every other organ in your chest, and your arm included. Wilkerson was left on the floor bleeding out for another half hour until he eventually died, though they did get concerned they need to shoot him again, which wasn't necessary because he bled out, and there were doctors present, although the only doctoring they did was comforting him until his last dying breath. And when he finally died, Wilkerson's body got cleaned up and put into a coffin and sent back to his widowed wife for a proper burial. Tom Ketchum was a man who lived life by the motto of a more famous Ketchum, gotta catch 'em all. What was he catching, I hear you thinking? Trains, and robbing them, because he was a train robber, and was a menace to all train conductors in the American Southwest. Tom was part of a gang who'd be frequent in train robberies, and so much so that the gang attempted to rob the same train 3 times in a row at one point. The first time they robbed it seemingly without trouble, then 2 years later they robbed the train again, but Tom wasn't part of this one, and the robbery had a few complications in the aftermath, with his brother Sam Ketchum, who was also part of the gang, getting wounded in a gunfight, arrested and dying in prison from said wounds. The third time only involved Tom, his horse and the same train again, and that went even worse. As Tom attempted to rob the train, he was instead met with the train conductor who not only recognised who Tom was, but also showed off to Tom what his boomstick can do, and blasted him in the arm and fell off his horse. While the train continued down the track, Tom was lying beside the tracks to be left for dead. Which would have been the case if not for a posse to come by to notice Tom, and they took him back to Colorado to recover from his injuries. Unfortunately, he had his arm amputated because of the shotgun blast, and once he felt better from this minor kerfuffle, he was transported back to Union County in the New Mexico territory, where he was put on trial for his failed attempt at a train robbery to be sentenced to death by hanging. And he was the only person to have been hanged in Union County, by the way, morbidly fun fact. His execution was scheduled in for the 26th of April 1901, and when the day came, it was a big day for Union County. Businesses closed early and saloons stayed open. Crowds had gathered around the gallows to watch an amputee ex-train robber die, tickets being sold to folks who came down to watch the hanging, and even dolls of Tom were made to mimic his eventual fate. But there was a small issue. No one had a clue on how to actually hang him. Outside a basic rope around neck and opening the trapdoor, there was debate over how long the rope had to be for a man like Tom, who also gained weight during his time in jail awaiting death. The rope needed to be just long enough to not choke him out because of a short fall, and to not decapitate him because the fall was too long, but to get that sweet spot to hear the snap, crackle, pop of a man's neck. They agreed a 5' 9" drop would have been long enough for Tom, and this debate lasted long enough for even Tom to get tired of it, with a few of his last words being, "Hurry up boys, get this over with." But little did everyone know, the rope got increased to 7 foot mistakenly, which was way too long of a drop. A hooded Tom Ketchum let out his final words to dig his grave very deep and telling the executioners to hurry up once again like he had somewhere more important to be. The sheriff cut the trigger open, Tom fell through the trapdoor, and on his way down the rope immediately decapitated him. His body landed upright to the floor on the fall for everyone to see what happened to him before falling over and gushing blood everywhere. He was pronounced dead by doctors a few minutes later, which didn't really need a doctor to determine that, I mean look at him. But they took his body away for post-mortem analysis and sewn his head back onto his shoulders for his burial in the afternoon. But not before photographs were taken of his dead headless body and having those photos made into postcards, forever marking and displaying the event that took place in Union County, which may have made people wish they were there to watch a man's hanging go wrong. Now for something a bit more shocking in a literal sense, when electricity was beginning to be rapidly turned into a modern day tool, not only did we use it for answering questions and experimenting with what electricity was capable of for science, technology and advancing humanity into a brand new era, but there was one question that soon stood out from the rest. How can we kill people with it? And for such an experiment such as this, we need to test subjects willing or unwilling enough to test this on, and they found their personal, right? Meet William Kemmler, a man who's not long for this world anymore after being found guilty of murdering his girlfriend in a drunken rage and being sentenced to death for it. The perfect person for humanity's first step into another way we can kill each other. The idea of the electric chair had first been conceived in 1881 by Alfred Southwick, a dentist who, after hearing about a drunk man instantly dying from intentionally touching a live electric generator, thought he could turn this into something that could be used for executions. With his knowledge in dentistry, his background in engineering, the several hundred stray dogs killed from experimenting, and some help on the chair from those part of big electricity at the time, the chair was ready for use on humans in 1890. After 9 years in development, hopefully it will have been worth the wait, because the wait had ended on the day of Kemmler's execution. On the day of his execution, the 6th of August 1890, a shaved-headed Kemmler was on his way to the execution room after spending his last few moments of the morning in his cell with breakfast and prayer. Once in the room, he sat in a chair and waited nonchalantly for his inevitable end, strapped into the chair with 17 witnesses attending and watching, with his final words being, "Take it easy and do it properly, I'm in no hurry." And then the switch has been pulled. 1,000 volts sunk into Kemmler's body over the course of 17 seconds, which was believed to have been enough to make him unconscious and induce cardiac arrest. After the time has passed, the power to the chair has been turned off, and one of the physicians attending declared, "Kemmler has now passed on." Hey, he's not dead, he's still breathing. Huh? Oh god, he still is. Have the current turned on, quick, no delay. Unsurprisingly, the first attempt at electrocution on a human didn't go straight forward, but the first attempt to electrocute a horse done the day before did go straight forward. But a horse isn't a human, so they ran it back, took it from the top, and Kemmler this time had 2,000 volts sunk into him, and if things weren't going wrong already, then now they would be. Blood vessels under his head had begun to rupture and bleed under the skin. His skull was beginning to be carbonized and his brain hardening from the heat of the electrical current entering and running through his body. And the area where the electrodes were causing his hair and skin to singe, releasing out an odour bad enough to force many of the witnesses to evacuate the room. This went on for about 8 minutes before Kemmler had finally been killed, which was way longer than the execution should have gone on for, and being the first human electrocution execution that it was, reporters were present too, to see if this newfound method of capital punishment was more humane than hanging as it was proclaimed to be. As with the whole ordeal that was the execution, it was heavily criticised, with a news report claiming electrocution being far worse than hanging in the papers, but that never stopped the electric chair from being used in the US for many decades to come. And to finish off the round of failed executions comes John McCaffrey, a botched hanging once again and a failed execution that is my personal favourite, not for the situation but for the aftermath of it all. This was the one botched execution that made me go down this morbid rabbit hole reading the stories of individuals long dead having their executions fucked up. So thanks John, it was very cool of you to die how you did. John McCaffrey was an Irish-American immigrant who lived in Wisconsin, who one day decided he had enough of his wife and drowned her in the cistern they had in their backyard, and was of course caught, arrested, trialled and charged with murder, which all led John to the punishment of hanging, scheduled for the 21st of August 1851. Now this was the first ever death sentence given to someone in Wisconsin since becoming a US state, and that's a big thing to happen, and there was 2,000 to 3,000 people who came out to watch Wisconsin's first ever capital punishment acted out. The crowds were standing and watching a man get prepared to die. They didn't have anything fancy like gallows or carts to help hang John with, rather they hung him on a tree. As would be expected with the first hanging ever in Wisconsin, no one had experience on how to do it, but they tried their best to hang and kill John, but their best wasn't good enough, because it took 20 minutes for John to die, and the whole time he was squirming around when he was hanging, as one typically would if they were being strangled and dangled, before finally succumbing to the strangulation. Many of the spectators who watched the whole thing were horrified by the execution and had post-execution clarity about hanging someone and watching him struggle the whole time. And there was one man in particular, Christopher Scholes, who was not only a spectator of the execution and horrified too, but he was a member of the Senate and editor for the local newspapers where the execution was held. He campaigned against the use of the death penalty in Wisconsin, which was only ever mandated for when people were found guilty of murder, and whilst in this push to end capital punishment was going on, the first prison for the state was almost finished being built, and that gave the anti-death penalty mindset more popularity, since rather than killing someone, they can live the rest of their days in an almost four-walls concrete room. And then just 2 years after John McCaffrey's execution, Wisconsin had the death penalty repealed, making John the first and only person to be executed in Wisconsin. But there has been several attempts to try to revert the repeal, and every time Wisconsin had rejected the reversion of the death penalty, and all it took was for the first execution Wisconsin had to go wrong enough for it to become their last execution so far. And there we have it, a few instances in the days long gone of criminals who got hit by the door on their way out of this mortal realm. Whether you believe it to be karma for their actions that got them where they were definitely not lucky to have their executions go the way they did. And many had hoped that they felt pain equal to or greater than the pain they had inflicted on their victims, because the death of people who deserved it will always be funny. And there are more cases of improper capital punishment like these presented in the video, so if you want to see more about how people get minorly inconvenienced during their executions, then there's a few buttons here you can press to support me. And I may do a part 2 depending on how popular this video gets. Or you can read the Wikipedia article of botched executions. You have free will, so you best make use of it before you no longer have it, because then you'll be dead, like everyone mentioned in the video. And if you wish to not be like one of these ex-condemned and don't want to be strangled or decapitated by a rope, bleed out by gunshot wounds or be cooked from the inside out during your execution, it's probably best to not act out in the ways that will lead you to that point in the first place.